Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Friday, the 24th day of May, 2024. And what we're going to do today, we're going to look at the top stories in the news, but we're going to, again, explain them from a wider perspective, as we always try to do here, how they fit into last day's Bible prophecy, to see these are not just a story here and a story there, but how it all fits together in a pattern that the Lord has established for us in his word, telling us what's going to happen at the time of the end. And as we see, as always, everything falling into place. All right, in our stories today, what we're going to do is take a step back and look at the wider picture of what's going on in the Middle East and in Western Europe also too, and how it fits with last days Bible prophecy. This includes the meaning of the death of the leader Raisi in Iran, Iran's goals in the Gaza war, what will occur in the soon upcoming European elections, and another example of Biden and the U.S.'s complete failure in meddling in the Middle East. And so we'll put all that together for you. We trust it'll be very, very helpful. All right, this is a headline. This is for the leftist magazine Politico, but it's interesting how they view this. And the issue is, what is the death of Iran's president? What the death of Iran's president really means. In other words, what's going to happen now that Raisi has been taken out of the picture so suddenly? Here's what they say. The fatal helicopter crash will accelerate a transition already underway to a faction that is eager to complete the country's nuclear weapons program. Let's stop right there. This is what we have been saying over and over again. The ultimate goal, of course, of Iran is the destruction of the big Satan, the U.S., and the little Satan, America. And it can only be achieved through nuclear weapons. And one of the possibilities, as we're going to see here, and from this article, what we've talked about, is that the new leadership will push that even faster and hard fast track it. So there'll be a nuclear weapon where the U.S. could theoretically be destroyed, and so could Israel. Now, we know that Israel won't be destroyed. We can't say the same thing about the U.S., but it's interesting how this article explains all this. So let's go on. It says, before he manages his rising out to best a weak field in the heavily orchestrated 2021 election, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi's primary claim to fame, or infamy, as the case may be, was his role in sending 5,000 political prisoners to their death. That mass murder in 1988 was part of a larger campaign by Iran's theocratic state to intimidate its increasing frustrated citizenry in preparation for the end of the 8-year war with Iraq and the death of the revolution's founder, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Raisi's many victims may find satisfaction in his death, but the repressive regime he leaves behind will outlive him. And that's the key. The regime, the table that's been set there, will continue with whoever is taking charge. Now, the article goes on to say it's perhaps fitting that Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash on Sunday at age 63, leaves behind another war that the regime helped to fuel and another looming leadership transition. Like the executions he fast-tracked in the revolution's earlier days, Raisi's elevation was intended to sustain the revolutionary enterprise through the much-anticipated succession of its current supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Raisi's unexpected loss will force the aging leaders of Iran's theocracy to improvise at a precarious moment at home and around the region. How they navigate this challenge will prove decisive for the future of Iran and the Middle East. Now, this is fascinating. Know what they say. What will come out of this? This is decisive for the Iranian goal for the region to be basically the supreme nation that will take control. And they're going to see this as an opportunity now, and some of the younger leaders and some of the other ones to push forward to what maybe Raisi was not doing with warp speed. Okay, the article goes on. The ascension of Raisi to his regime in the second high office was not a function, this is key, of any discernible charisma or political skill, but rather an acknowledgement that he possessed the qualities most valuable for late-stage autocracy. Get this. Mindless loyalty to the ruling system, a track record of unhesitating brutality, and deep integration within the religious, familial, and security networks that underpin the state. In this sense, he was a reliable functionary of the clerical state, a symptom, not the cause of its domestic repression and regional aggression. In other words, he was mainly a cog in the wheel. He wasn't, leading something or doing something that was unique. It was fitting with the repressive system that was put into play in 1979 when Ayatollah Khomeini took over and the Islamic State of Iran, basically was created. All right. And so his qualifications, that he has are what they're looking for in a supreme leader. And again, they're going to have to pick somebody to take Khomeini's place. He's 85, and someone to be the president of Iran. Will it be the same person? We don't know. Very likely it will. But who will it be, and what will he do? All right. The key words here. It remains to be seen what will occur in the Middle East. This is how the article closes. But here's the great point for us. We know from Scripture that ultimately Russia will take the lead in the Middle East, not Iran. Iran, although it's put all these nations together as, these groups together as surrogates, again, the Houthis down in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Gaza, of course, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and others that are there in the Middle East, basically encircling Israel. But they're not going to be the supreme power in the last days. Russia is. Now, two of our books go into great detail about this: the Ezekiel 38:39 invasion, and our book 25 Signs. We're near the end, particularly signs 9, 10, and 11. Where we talk about what's going to take place in this last days invasion. Now, they're a free download from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible Prophecy. We have to mention that every day because we've got many new people show up every day on the site. We want to emphasize it's a free download. Everything is free, over 400 videos, 65 books. You can download everything for free and watch. And also, too, if you watch the videos, you watch them on YouTube or on our website or on our app. We have an app, EOW, Educating Our World. We have an explanation each day of the stories we, talk about. So it's there. You could actually cut and paste that out to remind yourself, well, what did he say? What do you mean by this? Well, we kind of list that. So anyway, this is really interesting. So first and foremost, Iran will be doing something to try to make itself still the leader of the Middle East, which leads us to another interesting opinion piece. And this is from a person named Salem Al-Katabi. He's from the UAE, United Arab Emirates. He's a political analyst. But what's strange about this, he's found on the very conservative Israeli website Hayom, and he comments a lot. I haven't really quoted him before, but this one is interesting, and it's very similar to what the Politico story was. He said, and the headline is Iran's real aim in the war. What are they trying to do? And from his standpoint, he says confusing America's calculations in the Middle East and forcing the U.S. to recognize Iran's influence and its terrorist militia proxies is what Tehran's conduct is all about. And that's true. Tehran, they want to be the leader in the Middle East. They want to be the country that basically calls the shots. That's why they're putting together these different coalitions. They're terrorists in, above Israel's northern border in Lebanon, what they have in Gaza and the other places. All right. So as the article goes on to say, his opinion piece, says after nearly 6 months of the war sparked by the terrorist Hamas movement following the bloody and terrorist attack on October 7th, Iran's role in the war seems clear, and Iran's goals appear more evident by its own admission, not just analysis and conclusions that weren't lacking evidence and proof. But as they say, confession is the most potent form of evidence. And we're going to see specifically what the Supreme Leader said on his New Year's speech. He said the patience of the Palestinian people, Hamas, and the factions in Lebanon and Iraq destroyed the Americans and their calculations in the region. Khomeini's saying this. The resistance front was formed to confront the ongoing injustice of the Zionist criminals. The resistance unveiled its capabilities and confused the enemy. The resistance power confused America's miscalculations about the region. So the writer goes on to say this. This is Iran's real aim in the war, confusing America's calculations in the Middle East and forcing the U.S. to recognize Iran's influence and its terrorist militia proxies. The goal isn't liberating Jerusalem or Palestine, as terrorist militia leaders claim or propagandize. Otherwise, the Supreme Leader would have proclaimed that openly, and he's aware it would resonate and gain Iran's sympathy in the Arab and Islamic worlds. But he didn't mention it. It's all about proving the resistance capabilities funded and armed by Iran and shaping a new strategic realities while awaiting negotiations with the U.S. and the West over dividing the Middle East per the Iranian designs. In other words, it's the influence they want to have where they will have to be taken seriously. You have to negotiate with them if you want to get anything done in the Middle East. And so, again, Iran, according to this author, is using its surrogates to confuse the U.S. and other countries as to their ultimate goal, again, which isn't liberating Jerusalem, the bottom line is the eventual destruction of the U.S. and Israel. But first of all, that they're, different countries in the region and the U.S. will all take them seriously, that they're the ones you're going to have to deal with when it comes to, deciding how to do the Middle East, how to, reshape it, what to do with the Palestinians, etc., because they claim, and they're the ones that are having the authority with this, is the combination of these different military surrogates they have, again, in Lebanon and elsewhere. Okay, so this is going to be interesting because, again, they're not going to be the ones eventually who will be in control. We know that from Scripture. So something will happen. Could it be a regional war? What will this new generation of leadership may be the ones that probably will be the ones that will determine this. So that's why we'll keep an eye on what's going on. But we do know how it's eventually going to turn out. Like we said, it's going to be Russia, not Iran. Iran will be a surrogate of Russia in this invasion. They will not be the leaders. Now, interestingly, we move to Europe and take a look at their upcoming elections. This is from a periodical called the European Conservative, and it's a note to the European right. Don't snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Sounds like it should be aimed at the Republican Party in the U.S. Congress here. While newsrooms across Europe, including our scramble to report on the fallout between right-wing parties and analyze what shakeups in political groupings might mean for our next European Parliament, we should not forget that the right has an historic opportunity, get this, historic opportunity to make an impact in the larger battle for Europe. It should not be wasted on internal power struggles and infighting. And again, it sounds like the National Republican Party in the U.S., when Donald Trump was elected, they could have done so much more if they were unified, but they were not and still aren't. And what do we find? The same problem with the right parties on the right side of the spectrum in Europe. Now, here's what the article says. Again, it could relate this to the U.S. Ordinary Europeans do not care about the comings and goings in Brussels-based political groupings. Will they stay in the ECR? Will there be a split in the ID? Will there be a new faction? Well, we certainly report on these questions. The truth is that nobody in the real world really votes on the basis of whether their party of choice is in the European conservative and reform movements or in the identity and democracy movements. We must be careful not to get so drawn into parliamentary machinations that we lose sight of the big picture. And that's what they're worried about. And as the article goes on to say, millions of European voters are naturally conservative and growing more and more impatient about the status quo. In February, the beleaguered farmers were protesting in Brussels. One banner captured the underlying sentiment not just of farmers, but of the millions of other Europeans who backed them. This is not the Europe we want, and it is not. So the article goes on to say the victories of the populist and conservative parties in elections across Europe say it very clearly. This isn't the Europe we want. And now it's time with the European elections, the European Union, the vote that's coming up in June, European Parliament. They've got to be careful not to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. In other words, waste this opportunity on fighting with one another. No, you have to listen to us. No, this and that. And like we said, this is the same thing we saw when Donald Trump was elected. There's an opportunity to do a lot more good for America. But some of these right-wing parties says, no, he doesn't do this exactly as we want, so we won't support him. And what happened was a big mess, and the people did not work together. So anyway, the bottom line is, as this article goes on to say, and here is the punchline, any party worth supporting in June must fight for national sovereignty and democracy. National sovereignty and democracy. This is what the Europeans want. Why? Because they're losing everything to belong to this wider European Union where Brussels makes the decisions for the ordinary person in these countries, and they want to have their own national sovereignty. But this is not what's going to happen according to Scripture. They won't be able to get it together, even though it's what the people want. And it's precisely what we see in Daniel chapter 2, where it talks about this alignment of these 10 nations here at the time of the end. It's kind of like iron mixed with clay. They don't adhere. In other words, they want something, the people want something, but the rulers want something else, and the rulers will prevail. Now, we quote Stephen Miller. He has an excellent book on Daniel. We're quoting him from our 25 signs. We're near the end book when we talk about sign 12, the revival of the ancient Roman Empire. Here's what he says, and here's what we're looking forward to. In short, shortly before the second coming of Christ, 10, a literal or symbolic number of kingdoms or nations of unequal strength will unite to form a coalition that will rise out of the ruins of the ancient Roman Empire. Since Rome is part of Europe and the activities of that ancient empire centered in Europe, it is reasonable to assume that this area of the world will play a leading role in the future regime. In Daniel 7, the prophet indicates that from this empire will come the evil world leader of the last days, commonly known as the Antichrist. And this is precisely what is being set up right now. Although the people want something, the parties cannot get themselves together, and Europe will eventually, merge in this 10-nation confederation that can be easily taken over by one leader, which it will be, the final Antichrist. And this, of course, is the revival of the ancient Roman Empire, sign number 12 of our 25 signs. We're near the end. So even though the people would like a certain rule, sadly, this is not what's going to take place. It will not be conservative. It will not be populist. It will not be fighting for democracy. It's going to be part of this larger blob of globalism, which unfortunately the world is falling into. Now, finally, our last heading, Pentagon tacitly admits Biden's Gaza pier stunt is a total failure. So in all of this, we see the U.S. trying to be, meaningful, trying to have some of meaning in the area by doing things. And one of the things they attempted to do, we mentioned this, is because of the problem of getting the different foodstuffs into Gaza to feed the civilians. Get the one crossing blocked by the Egyptians. You've got all this other fighting going on. What they're going to do, and what they did, is build this pier. And the pier is going to, the trucks are coming to the pier in Gaza and bring them to the people, and the U.S. will ride to the rescue. Now, the problem is it's a total failure. And this is what this from the Federalist. It didn't take long for the Pentagon to all but confirm that the temporary Gaza port constructed at the behest of President Biden is turning out to be a total disaster, as is everything else he's done in the Middle East. The admission came during a press conference in which General Patrick S. Ryder, the Pentagon spokesman, told reporters that none of the 569 metric tons of food and supplies delivered into Hamas-controlled Gaza via the port have been distributed to Gaza residents by non-governmental organizations. 569 metric tons were delivered. None of them have properly been distributed. Constructed by the U.S. military, this $320 million floating port was announced earlier this year during Biden's State of the Union address, a move designed to cater to the pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party. Since the port's completion last Thursday, some trucks operated by non-governmental organizations tasked with delivering the aid to another staged area have been ransacked by looters. And so basically they had these trucks set out and looters stopped them. And the whole goal of, getting the food distributed to the Gazans did not work because it was not thought through. It was just one of these plans that looks good on paper. Look what we're doing to the Gazans. And yet, again, the U.S. fails again. So in seemingly every aspect, the U.S. is a failure in its meddling in the situation in Gaza. This is why we repeat that our enemies do not fear us, our friends don't trust us, and the other countries think that we're irrelevant. So again, Biden's desire to be a big player in this by coming to the rescue with this pier, the floating pier that they built at a cost of $320 million to bring the foodstuffs in. Well, none of it's getting to where it's supposed to get because they had not thought it through or planned for the fact that the people in Gaza are not going to comply with the U.S. All right. So let's take a step back and summarize what we've said today. It's important to look at the big picture when we recount these daily stories. We always try to do this. What we see today from Iran, Europe, and the United States is stage setting for precisely the sort of events that Scripture predicts. A coalition of nations will attack Israel, as well as the forming of a 10-nation confederation that will comprise Europe in the last days. And what we see is everything from so many different areas falling into place, specifically falling into place to fulfill what the Bible predicts. Now, again, the timing of this, we don't know when it'll eventually all occur. We say that over and over again. It's forming and it's miraculously taking shape, but we have to be careful of assuming it'll happen immediately. We need to look at it one day at a time. But what we do see from all this is amazingly how Scripture knows what the future holds, tells us this ahead of time, and we see it right in front of our very eyes, and that should give us encouragement and comfort. All right, we'll be back today with later with other stories. What the International Court of Justice says about Israel. Can they go into Gaza? They're going to make a ruling on it, and so we'll talk about that. Until then, I'm Don Stewart. Thanks as always for watching, and may the Lord, as always, richly, richly bless you.